Welcome back to Gen X Horror, where we dive deep into the wonderfully weird world of the 80s horror that kept us glued to our wood panel TV sets. You know that feeling when you're scrolling through streaming services and nothing hits quite like those grainy, over-the-top nightmares that used to haunt the back shelves of Blockbuster? Well, grab your Crystal Pepsi and settle in, because today we're celebrating the deep cuts. Those beautifully bizarre B movies that somehow managed to be more memorable than half the big-budget blockbusters of the Reagan era. While everyone else was watching Top Gun and Ferris Bueller, we were the weirdos popping no-dos and renting movies with hand-drawn cover art that somehow delivered exactly what we needed at 1 a.m. These aren't your typical Friday the 13th sequels or your mainstream Nightmare on Elm Street entries. And man, we're talking about films that made you question whether the video store clerk was secretly trying to traumatize an entire generation. So hit that Jiffy Pop and dim those lights, gang, because we're taking a chronological ride through the 15 most wonderfully fringe films that'll make you question why modern horror just doesn't hit the same. All right, let's get into it. Remember when your biggest worry was whether your Atari 2600 would work after your little brother's marathon pitfall session? Well, in 1981's The Pit, Jamie Benjamin's problems make controller drift look like a cakewalk. This Canadian oddity follows a weird, lonely 12-year-old who discovers a pit oddly enough full of carnivorous creatures in the woods and decides the best course of action isn't to swing over them on a vine, but to feed his enemies to them. The film manages to be a really creepy coming-of-age story and a monster movie, which is like mixing your Saturday morning cartoons with your late-night creature features. Theoretically, it shouldn't work, but this one does. Director Lou Lehman shot this beauty on a tiny budget in Ontario, creating what feels like a version of E.T. if Elliot was a disturbed, perverted teen and his alien friend had teeth. The practical effects for the tralalogs have that DIY aesthetic that just adds to the charm of this deeply unsettling film.
1970. 3 children were born during a total eclipse of the sun. Now, 10 years later, they share a terrible compulsion to kill.
Hey, you know, before Chucky made Killer Kids mainstream, this twisted little flick was already given playground terror with a side of astrological horror. It was Bloody Birthday, also from 1981. 3 children born during a solar eclipse grew up without souls and celebrate their 10th birthday by going on a murder spree. The film treats its pint-sized psychopaths with the same matter-of-fact approach that John Hughes used for teenage angst, except instead of detention, these kids are handing out death sentences. Directed by Mike's brother Ed Hunt, who managed to create something that feels like a mashup between a slasher film and an after-school special gone goth, complete with that unmistakable early 80s suburban setting where every house looks like it came straight out of a Sears catalog. Man, these kids don't just kill people, though. They plan elaborate schemes with the efficiency of tiny corporate execs, making you wonder if maybe the real horror is how organized children can be when they put their minds to it. This movie is a complete blast and 100% sleepover in the basement worthy. Alright gang, picture this. You're chilling in your wood panel den, you're probably wearing a Spuds MacKenzie tank top, and you rented what looks like a straight up alien ripoff from the sci-fi aisle. It had to have had been 1982's Forbidden World. Well, congratulations to you and your tank top. You've just discovered Roger Corman's shameless but surprisingly effective space horror that somehow manages to be both a complete copy and its own super weird thing. When a research facility's genetic experiments go horribly wrong, as they always did in the 80s, it's up to a space troubleshooter to clean up the mess, which involves a shape-shifting alien that looks like it escaped from a biology textbook's version of the Necronomicon. Just to put this movie in perspective, it's boob-heavy, and part of their space uniform involves high heels, which seems like an odd tactical or even utilitarian choice. Producer Roger Corman, the undisputed king of let's make it for $37 in a case of Zima, recycled sets and effects from his previous film Battle Beyond the Stars, proving that waste not can apply to alien intestines as well. The creature effects are genuinely gross and creative, featuring some of the most impressively disgusting transformation this side of the thing. all wrapped up in that distinctly Corman blend of B-movie awesomeness and surprisingly solid craftsmanship. Just overlook the cheese and, man, lean into those jump scares, because they're there.
What is it thing, Hauser? Proto-bead what? Just stick with your charter, Colby. Just figure out a way to trap it. You figure it out. I'm not going back.
Back when college meant calling home once a week from a payphone and surviving on ramen noodles and parental neglect, this slasher served up dormitory dread with all the subtlety of a baseball bat to the nuts. 1982's The Dorm That Dripped Blood involved a group of students staying behind during winter break to clean out an old dorm, only to get picked off one by someone who clearly has strong opinions about renovation. The film takes the classic isolated location setup and overdoses on paranoia, making every shadow and creaky metal door feel like a death sentence waiting to happen. This was a video nasty, and the scenes that earned it that designation are evident and appreciated. Director Stephen Carpenter and Jeffrey Oberst shot this atmospheric little nightmare on the UCLA campus for about the cost of a semester's textbooks, creating something that feels like a cross between Halloween and a very murderous episode of MTV's The Real World. Rest in peace, Pedro. What sets this one apart from the pack is its commitment to building genuine dread. Sure, the killer's reveal is absolutely insane, but the journey there is filled with enough legitimate scares to make you never want to volunteer on a campus ever again. Do not share this one with your college-age kids. Now here's something that feels like it was beamed directly from the heart of 80s cable television straight into our collective nostalgic core. Remember full movies on broadcast networks? If you don't, you might not remember The Midnight Hour from 1985. This made-for-TV flick follows a group of high school kids in Salem who accidentally raise the dead on Halloween night, turning their costume party into a legitimate monster mash. They should have stuck with shaving cream and eggs. What starts as your typical teen hijinks quickly spirals into a supernatural spectacular featuring, zombies, vampires, and a werewolf that looks like he raided John Travolta's Saturday Night Fever wardrobe. The film was produced as part of ABC's attempt to cash in on the MTV generation's love of music videos. It had pop songs and dance numbers that somehow make perfect sense when you're watching dead people boogie. It didn't work for me. Dick Clark produced this wonderfully cheesy time capsule, creating something that captures the exact moment when 50s nostalgia collided with 80s rebelliousness, resulting in a movie that feels like American Graffiti crashed into Night of the Living Dead at a baller high school reunion. Was this Halloween for you guys in the 80s as well? In Chicago, this was all Halloween was. Eggs, cans of shaving cream, bunch of hooligans running around. I'd give anything to go back.
Where the hell are we anyway?
Swedish metal meets slasher mayhem in this gloriously absurd combination that proves the best ideas come from the most unlikely places. And somehow metal and Sweden were always a match made in heaven in the 1980s. Blood Tracks from 1985 gave us a banger. When a heavy metal band called Solid Gold films a music video in an abandoned factory, they awaken a family of cannibalistic miners who've been living underground since the 1940s, and they have some very strong opinions about modern music, but didn't bat a decomposing eye at a metal band named Solid Gold. The film could be a concert film or a survival horror and a family drama about the importance of keeping your murderous relatives properly fed and entertained. Director Mats Helge Olsen clearly had access to both a legitimate metal band and what appears to be every smoke machine in Scandinavia, creating a visual feast that's part rock opera and part splatter film. The underground family dynamics are genuinely weird and compelling. Imagine The Hills Have Eyes if the desert family had been trapped in a mine shaft listening to nothing but classical music for 40 years. And you're starting to get the picture of how bizarre this thing really gets. Now, just when you thought the 80s couldn't get any weirder, along comes this bloody fun sequel that throws everything we know about slasher films into a blender with a healthy dose of musical theater insanity. Theater nerds up front for this one. 1987 Slumber Party Massacre II took center stage. Instead of a faceless killer with a drill, we get the driller killer, a leather-clad, pompadoured maniac who looks like he escaped from a Grease revival and decided murder was way more fun than singing Summer Nights. The film follows Courtney, survivor of the first film, as she experiences nightmares that blend slumber party terror with full-blown rock opera sequences that might make Rocky Horror blush. Director Deborah Brock completely abandoned the straightforward slasher approach of the original and created something that feels like a collaboration between Dario Argento and the choreographer from Footloose, complete with dream sequences that defy all logic and a killer who literally guitars people to death. What makes this brilliant and fun is how committed everyone is to the madness. This isn't a parody of slasher films. It's a slasher film that decided rules are for squares and went completely off the rails in the best and most fun way.
Enter another world.
We just hanging around this slaughterhouse waiting for our turn.
Now, long before The Shawshank Redemption made prison movies respectable, this supernatural slasher was serving up jailhouse justice with a side of ghostly revenge. And it's 1987's Prison, and it gave us just what we needed at 11 p.m. on a Friday. When Creedmoor State Prison reopens 20 years after an execution went horribly wrong, the ghost of Charlie Forsythe returns to settle some very old scores with the guards who wronged him. The film stars a young Viggo Mortensen in one of his first roles, back when he was just another pretty face instead of the sword-wielding king we'd later know and love. Director Renny Harlin, fresh off his success with A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, brings the same energy and practical effects mastery to this claustrophobic little nightmare, creating kill scenes that are both inventive and unsettling. What elevates this above typical supernatural slashers is its commitment to the institutional horror. The real terror isn't just the vengeful ghost, it's the system that created him, making this feel like it's stuck between a haunted house movie and one of the more violent episodes of HBO's classic prison series, Oz. Photo shoots were never quite the same after this Italian giallo decided to turn fashion photography into a blood-soaked nightmare that makes Vogue look like a church newsletter. And if you guessed it's Delirium from 1987, damn, you are good. When models from a men's magazine start getting murdered in ways that mirror the photos they pose for, photographer Roberto Rossini finds himself caught between artistic vision and homicidal mania, which, let's be honest, is probably closer to reality than we'd like to admit. The film comes from director Lamberto Bava, son of Mario Bava and heir to the Italian horror throne, who brings all the stylistic flourishes and creative kills that made giallo films the darling of European exploitation cinema. This one shot in Rome with all the neon and synthesizer-heavy aesthetic that defined late 80s Italian horror. And this feels like what would happen if Patrick Bateman decided to become a fashion photographer instead of an investment banker. The murders are elaborately staged set pieces that blur the line between art and violence, creating something that's simultaneously beautiful and disturbing. Basically, it's everything we loved about 80s Italian horror distilled into one gloriously excessive package.
Something strange is happening to some ordinary people.
Alright, crazy scenario. An alien parasite crash lands in LA. And instead of plotting world domination, it decides to live its best 80s life, jacking sports cars, blasting heavy metal, robbing banks, and leaving a trail of bodies. This is 1987's The Hidden. Honestly, this alien is basically the ultimate Gen X Mallrat, minus the acid-spitting tentacles. Hot on its trail is FBI agent Lloyd Gallagher, played by Kyle MacLachlan, fresh off Blue Velvet and already giving off those quirky future Dale Cooper vibes. This film was shot for a modest budget of about $5 million, which is wild considering the level of mayhem they pulled off. High-speed car chases, over-the-top explosions, and practical alien gore effects that feel like a slimy cousin to The Thing. New Line Cinema originally thought about making this a straight horror flick, but director Jack Shoulder leaned hard into the cop thriller hybrid, basically giving us Lethal Weapon with a goo monster. This is a standout, not just because of the creature effects, but the vibe. It's pure 1987. From the soundtrack blaring mind-splitting rock to the way the alien seems to only care about fast cars, loud music, and killing anyone in its way. Watching it now feels like a time capsule of 80s era excess, if that excess was fueled by goo from an intergalactic space slug.
Pin is the one and only friend Leon's ever had. The only one who doesn't care that Leon's different.
Imagine growing up in a house where your father's medical dummy becomes your brother's best friend, and you're starting to understand the deeply unsettling family dynamics at play in this 1988 Canadian psychological thriller, Pin. Leon Lowe's obsession with Pin, which is short for Pinocchio, an anatomically correct medical dummy, escalates from childhood coping mechanism to full-blown psychotic break, dragging his sister Ursula along for the ride, whether she likes it or not. The premise is brilliant and was really reaching for something new and unique in this one. The film manages to make a plastic dummy more terrifying than most movie monsters, simply by treating him as a real character and letting our imaginations fill in the horrifying gaps. Director Sander Stern, who also wrote The Amityville Horror, brings that same suburban nightmare aesthetic to this tale of family dysfunction, creating something that feels like a Cronenberg-directed episode of The Wonder Years. Or Small Wonder, I guess, take your pick. What's brilliant about this one is how it grounds its supernatural elements in genuine psychological trauma. By the time you're questioning whether Pin is actually moving or if Leon is just completely losing his mind, you realize it doesn't matter, because both options are equally terrifying and honestly a little fun.
At first, it seemed easy.
Hey, stop taking the money!
Take the money and drop it from the sky.
Military robbers versus undead scarecrows sounds like the kind of high concept pitch that would get you laughed out of every studio in Hollywood. But 1988 Scarecrow's atmospheric little nightmare makes it work like gangbusters. When a group of ex-military thieves crash land their plane in a field surrounded by scarecrows, they discover that some farm equipment has pretty strong opinions about trespassers and an even stronger work ethic when it comes to protecting the property. The film was shot on a surprisingly tiny budget, but director William Wesley manages to create genuine atmosphere and dread, showing that sometimes the best horror comes from the most ridiculous premise executed with complete conviction. The Scarecrow effects are a beautiful combination of practical makeup and creative cinematography, creating creatures that feel both ancient and otherworldly. What makes this one work so well is its commitment to the rural horror aesthetic. This feels like a movie that could only exist in the sweet spot between slasher films and creature features, where anything goes as long as it's genuinely creepy.
Happy Halloween, Tommy.
Something for me? 'Cause I'm special?
Yes.
Halloween horror reaches peak 80s absurdity in this tale of devil worship, family dysfunction, and the kind of overacting that makes William Shatner look subtle by comparison. We're wrapping back up the satanic panic with Hack-O-Lantern, which is also from 1988. When young Tommy's grandfather indoctrinates him into a satanic cult, I guess because he ran out of Werthers to share or stories about back in my day, it sets up a Halloween showdown that involves ritual murders, possessed pumpkins, and enough fake blood to fill a California swimming pool. This film was shot in California by director Jag Mundra, who brought a distinctly international perspective to American suburban satanic panic, creating something that feels like a Bollywood director's horror hot take on American Halloween traditions. The cult ceremonies are elaborate affairs, complete with robes and chanting and production values that suggest someone actually cared about making their devil worship look appropriately theatrical. What elevates this above typical satanic horror is its complete commitment to the holiday setting. Every kill is themed around Halloween. Every scare is pumpkin adjacent, making this feel like the kind of movie that should be required viewing every October. Preferably with a bowl of candy corn and a healthy sense of irony.
I don't know about you, but that sounds suspicious to me.
The 80s mall culture gets the horror treatment it probably always deserved in this wonderfully ridiculous tale of retail revenge in Phantom of the Mall, Eric's Revenge from 1989. When Eric's house is burned down to make way for a new shopping mall, he survives but becomes horribly disfigured and decides that the best way to handle urban development is through a campaign of elaborate murders in the food court. And in the spirit of true 80s excess, And that seems reasonable. The film stars Ken Foree and Kerry Whitman bringing genuine acting chops to what could have been a completely throwaway premise, and somehow making us care about both the vengeful phantom and his oblivious teenage targets. Director Richard Freeman shot this in an actual mall during off hours, creating an authentically eerie atmosphere that captures that specific feeling of being alone in a place designed specifically for crowds. It's like Dawn of the Dead without zombies. The kills are inventive and mall themed, ranging from death by escalator to murder in the movie theater, making this feel like a twisted celebration of everything we loved and hated about 80s shopping culture wrapped up in a surprisingly effective slasher package.
Yeah, and when they found him, he was chewing on what was left of her remains.
Sometimes the most memorable horror films are the ones that dare to be completely shameless in their inspiration. And 1989's Offerings as a Halloween clone manages to be both a complete ripoff and somehow its own weird thing. When young John Radley escapes from a mental institution and returns to his hometown on the anniversary of his commitment, he begins leaving offerings of body parts for his childhood crush Gretchen. Mad props for ditching the traditional candy and flowers, though, for real. The film follows the Halloween template so closely that it's basically a beat-for-beat remake, except with the protagonist who collects human ears instead of just stalking teenagers around suburban streets. Director Christopher Reynolds shot this in Oklahoma with a cast of unknowns and a budget that probably wouldn't cover an Uber to Wrigley Field during peak times, but somehow creates something that feels both familiar and pretty effective. What makes this more than just a shameless cash grab is its commitment to the small-town atmosphere that it has. And this actually feels like it takes place in a real community where everyone knows everyone's business, making the killer's return genuinely feel like a neighborhood crisis rather than just another slasher setup. Most of these movies didn't get big marketing pushes or the prime theater real estate, but they were the ones that stuck with us long after we returned them to the video store. Maybe late, but always rewound. Each one of these beautifully bizarre flicks captures something essential about the era, when horror was willing to try anything, no matter how ridiculous, as long as it could deliver genuine scares and memorable moments to an audience of us 80s kids. What makes these films special isn't just their place in horror history, but how they represent a time when creativity was pushed beyond its limits, but entire genres were created and franchises were born. It's different today for sure. Let me know in the comments if we missed any deep cut movies from your own late night binges, and we could talk about them there. Thanks for watching, everyone. I love you. And as always, stay cool.